Welcome to Team Performance Coaching. My name is David Hopper, and today we are going to look at the story of Nehemiah in the Bible and talk about how Nehemiah shows us emotional intelligence. Now, right off the bat, we should probably ask the question, what is emotional intelligence? Well, here it is. Capability of individuals to recognize their own emotions and those of others, discern between different feelings, label them appropriately, and then use that information to guide their thinking and behavior, manage and adjust emotions, adapt environment, or achieve one's goals. Let me give you 6 things to think through as we're working through the book of Nehemiah. The first one is, do you recognize your own emotions? As you're feeling them, as you're facing them in the midst of the moment, can you recognize the emotions you're feeling? Number 2, how do you respond when you're frustrated? Everyone has a normal plane in which they live life, but when they are frustrated, they shift into a different person, a different emotion. Number 3, do you have active listening skills? Very important to know, are you someone who listens in order to understand, or are you someone who listens in order to say what you want to say? Number 4, how do you respond when you're anxious? It has multiple ways that we could respond to it. Recognize what is yours. When you get anxious, what do you do? How do you use that anxious energy? Number 5, are you patient to get to the right conclusion? Many people want to get to conclusions very quickly. Are you patient to get to the right one? Number 6 with emotional intelligence is about recognizing other emotions in other people. When you recognize other emotions, do you ignite them forward? Do you help them move forward? And I'll explain more about each one of these as we look at the book of Nehemiah. But let's start with a story. And this story was a chance I had to help 2 organizations merge, which was so fun. It was interesting to just see how the merging process works. And here's what I learned in the process. When you talk about a merge, what you're really talking about is one organization is taking over the other one. And this story is about the opportunity I had to help 2 organizations merge. Now, the interesting thing about mergers is usually one side is quite a bit stronger than the other. If both organizations are super strong, and I'm sure that happens every once in a while, then most likely they're going to continue to go and be their own organizations. But in this case, one of the sides, one of the organizations was basically going bankrupt within 2 months. And so they knew it, at least most of the people knew it. Some did not. But most of the people understood that they needed this merger to survive. The other side also knew that same information. And they were not using emotional intelligence through the merger. They were saying how things were going to be. They were moving everything forward really fast. And this side that was basically losing something that was near and dear to their heart really started being hurt by what was happening within this merger. Watching that last part back, I was thinking about a side note with mergers. Most businesses begin from a place of passion, a belief. And it's really hard for someone when they have put everything that they love and dear and passion and believe in into something like a business or an organization of some kind, and then feel like they're giving it all up within a merger. But here's a couple thoughts to be thinking about when it comes to mergers, and why, especially in the nonprofit world, it can be incredibly valuable to do. Start by talking it through. You probably have similar passions of where you're trying to get. Nonprofits all have a very similar passion, similar goals, even similar missions that they're trying to accomplish. As you talk it through with someone, as you talk it through with groups, you may find that together you are a lot stronger, more powerful, able to do more, able to bring in more funding. You may actually get where you wanted all along, the thing that started the belief in you, by merging in 2 groups or 3 groups and these organizations coming together to do something way, way bigger. The second thing to really put together within mergers is get everyone on board. Get everyone on board. What that means is you have about 10 meetings that feel like they are exactly the same. I heard this so much when I was working through other mergers. We've already had that meeting. We talked about that the last meeting. We already figured that part out. No, you have 10 meetings, 20 meetings that feel like they're exactly the same, but it got everyone on board. You got more people with each meeting. More people understood the ultimate vision that you're after, and you have to do it. You have to go through that. It takes a lot of MOUs. It takes a lot of documentation, a lot of legal documentation, but really it's just everyone coming together, understanding each point, and that may take multiple meetings that feel like they're exactly the same. And the third thing I would say is just a side note, throwing it into this other video with mergers, is bringing in an outside party. When two organizations are bringing their passions and beliefs together, that can get real messy real fast. If you have a third party looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, they're really going to help move everything forward and make sure active listening's happening, and most important to this video, emotional intelligence is happening. And this is a quick commercial, but this is something that we do at Team Performance Coaching. So if you are interested, we'd love to jump on board with you and be that third party helping the merger happen. Especially with nonprofits, I've just seen the power of two nonprofits becoming one with the same passion, able to do so much more. So this is a passion of ours to help that happen. It's exactly what this corporation was created for, and we'd love to partner with you. Go to teamperformancecoaching.info for more information. Now back to emotional intelligence. You see, my job was to keep everyone's eyes on the bigger picture, why they were doing the merger at all, how much stronger they would be at the end of this. What's interesting is the position that they would end up being in is exactly what the stronger organization was doing. Everything that they were saying and every move that they were making was exactly what was going to happen. The problem was they didn't understand emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is when you come along and you make sure that the other organization, the one that is losing so much, is coming along with you in the process of change. Again, the change is going to be there no matter what, but just helping someone through this change, moving slow enough and gentle enough to help them understand the changes that are coming. As we look at that, it hits a couple of those first 6 areas of emotional intelligence that I was speaking of. Do you have active listening skills? Are you actively listening to the person that's telling you how they feel in the moment? And do you have the patience for the right conclusions? Doesn't mean you're going to respond to everything the person is saying, doesn't mean you're going to change anything based on what the person is saying, but you are being patient to get to the results that are needed throughout this process. So let's turn our attention to Nehemiah chapter 5. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about how chapters 4 and 6, the conflict is coming from outside of their people group. This is the Jewish people building the wall back in Jerusalem. So chapters 4 and 6, the conflict is from outside enemies attacking them. But in chapter 5, the conflict comes from within. And it's basically 2 groups of people within the Jewish people. One being very wealthy and one being very poor. So poor, in fact, that they were selling everything that they owned. All their homes, land, anything that they had, they could sell, including their own kids. Their own kids they were needing to put into slavery to pay off debt. So it is a really, really bad situation. To make things even worse, the people that they were getting these loans from, selling their children, selling their things, were actually their own people. So not only are they needing to sell just to survive everything that they own, but they're selling it to their own people to survive, which actually goes against their own laws and things that they should know and they shouldn't be doing. So the situation is so dire that an all-out war could break out at any moment. So chapter 5 puts us in the midst of basically a civil war about to break out. Now, how is Nehemiah going to respond to this? Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, "We and our sons and our daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain." Others were saying, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards, although we are the same flesh and blood as our countrymen. And though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we had to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. Can you see how bleak the situation is for them? How would you feel if you were selling your daughters into slavery to survive? Put yourself in that moment. And can you have the emotional intelligence to work through this major issue? Nehemiah does. Here's what Nehemiah does next. When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you are exacting from your own countrymen. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them. Let's take a second to understand how they got into this situation in the first place. This is understanding Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel. Three very important characters in this story. So watch this. What's up, everyone? Really, to understand Nehemiah chapter 5, you have to go back into time a little bit. So I made some really advanced notes on this paper. So we start off actually with Ezra and Nehemiah. These were by one author and really should be together, but they were separated at some point in the Bible. And you start off with Ezra 1 through 6. This is about 70 years after Babylon captivity, when Zerubbabel comes along and he wants to rebuild the temple. Well, this is 515 BC when the temple is finished. But Cyrus allowed them to go back to Jerusalem in about 539 BC. Remember BC, before you have it going down to 0 and then it comes up in AD, which we're in now, hopefully. So 539 BC, Cyrus allows them to go back and they finish the temple in 515 BC. 50,000 Jews went back to Jerusalem after being in captivity. It's this great moment and they rebuild the temple. But then the grandchildren that were never in captivity, they come along and they also want to help in the rebuilding of the temple. But Zerubbabel says, no, you have no part in this. And that causes this major conflict. We'll come back to that. So then we get to Ezra chapter 7 and Ezra, this person himself. So this is about 50 years later. It's important to catch this timeline. So 50 years later, and his whole thing was about rebuilding the community, spiritual renewal, 458 BC. Now, King Art over here, he allows this group to go back to Jerusalem and to rebuild this spiritual renewal. And they do it, they accomplish it. It's this great thing. But one of the things Ezra says is the Israelites who came back and had already married non-Israelites, which was against the Torah, which was against the spiritual community that they were trying to build. He's totally against this and says they all need to get divorces, which we don't see anywhere that God tells them to say that. I think he just felt that. And so he started this whole thing, and some do it and some don't. It causes a major conflict and it kind of ends in conflict. Then we get to Nehemiah. Again, my last piece of paper. Nehemiah, this is 12 years later. So we are 62 years after the first group goes. So 62 years later, he goes back and he sees that the walls are all destroyed, and it really bothers him, this city in ruin. So in 445 BC, he gets King Art to actually let him go back and rebuild the walls, which is awesome. King Art at this point sends a whole army with them to protect him along the way, which he didn't do here. So it's a pretty cool situation, and they rebuild the walls. Now the conflict in this one, first of all, was there was a bunch of people also living within those walls and had an issue, or around those walls, and had an issue with the fact that they were rebuilding these walls. So while they're rebuilding it in chapters 4 and 6, you see the conflict from the outside. But in chapter 5, the conflict, every one of these has a conflict, is 62 years ago, these Jews are doing quite well versus the ones that have just showed up. Some are wealthy, some are poor, and the wealthy have now taxed the poor so much so that they have to sell their homes, sell their vineyards, sell their children, and that is this conflict that's going to cause a major civil war. Now the Nehemiah ends, and it all ends well, and we'll get to the ending. There's a spiritual renewal with chapters 8 through 12, but even in chapter 13, Nehemiah's walking around. He sees the temple is in neglect. He sees this Sabbath is being dishonored. He sees a bunch of shops around the walls, and the walls are just, they don't have the same meaning that they had. So it ends actually quite negatively. And the whole point of Nehemiah and Ezra is that you can take actions of change, but if your heart isn't changed, it's not going to have the long-lasting effect that you want. But let's jump back into chapter 5. As you can see, some of the people have been made whole at this point, but others have not. And now Nehemiah has to step in and work through this situation using emotional intelligence. Here's a couple verses that come from earlier in the Bible. Exodus chapter 22, verses 25 and 26, where it says, "If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it by sunset." We also see this in Leviticus. It takes it a step further. This is Leviticus chapter 25, verses 36 through 37, where it says, "But not take interest or any profit from them, but fear your God, so that they may continue to live among you. You must not lend them money at interest or sell them food at a profit." This is why the people are so mad. They saw their people going against the very laws against their people. I mean, it was awful situation. As the leader that Nehemiah was, he responds to the problem. Listen to verses 8 and 9. "As far as possible, we have bought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you're selling your brothers only for them to be sold back to us?" They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. So I continued, "What you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies?" Nehemiah makes it about God. He makes it about a bigger issue. How are they supposed to be under God? In your organization, can you make it about the bigger thing? Whatever that may be. As the leader, you can say, just do it because I'm the leader, I'm the boss, and that's how it's supposed to be done. Or you can make it about the bigger issue, the bigger goal, the achievement you're trying to get to, the victory, the end of the year goals, and how you're supposed to be helping someone or helping whatever it is. You make it about a bigger issue. That's what Nehemiah does. By the way, we have this same calling. If you're a Christian, the same calling from God to push people to a higher thing, or at least not be someone who's a complete jerk, if you will. For example, Luke 6:34 and 38 says, "If you lend money expecting repayment, great, but that doesn't make you special." I mean, banks lend money expecting repayment. And if you're lending money expecting repayment from those who are barely surviving, selling their home, their vineyards, or their children, if you will, that just makes you a horrible person. And you're one of these jerks that Nehemiah is dealing with. In 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19, it says that the rich should be rich in deeds. So if you're someone in this world today that has the means to help people, you need to be helping people. That's part of the life that you live in this world today. Are you calling people to a bigger thing? Are you moving people to a greater thing? Nehemiah is reaching out to this group that has already settled in Jerusalem, saying, you need to be so much better than the way you are being right now. And some of you may have the same thing going on in your life, where you need to start moving yourself to a better place as well. In verse 10, Nehemiah says, "I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain. But let the exacting of usury stop. Give back to them immediately their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves and houses, and also the usury you are charging them, the 100th part of the money, grain, new wine, and oil." He takes a leadership stand. He is willing to, by both words and example, show exactly how they should be acting at this point in their life. In verse 12, they respond. They respond to the leadership of Nehemiah. They say, "We will give it back," which is what needed to happen, right? and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Then I summoned the priests," this is Nehemiah talking again, "and made the nobles and the officials take an oath to do what they had promised." Now notice this, the emotional intelligence that Nehemiah has at this point to not only get it from their words as well, but also get them to take an action. He gets them to take an oath before the what do they say? The officials, the priests, the nobles. He makes them take an oath in front of all of those people and say, "We agree, we are not going to take this usury anymore." That is emotional intelligence. That is getting an action out of words. Finally, in verse 13, it says, "I also shook out the folds of my robe and said, in this way, God, shake out of his house and possessions every man who does not keep this promise." He basically puts a curse on, if any man doesn't do this, you will be cursed. I'm shaking out my robe, which was a term for cursing them. "So may such a man be shaken out and emptied as well." At this, the whole assembly said, "Amen." They praised the Lord because they always give it back to God. And the people did as they promised. See, he lets them know that there's going to be consequences if you don't do these actions. And he also gives God the praise, saying this is about God. He pushes them to continue to remember this is a bigger issue than just them. And in our organizations, are we also pushing people to the bigger goal, the bigger mission, the bigger vision that we're trying to accomplish? And do we get people to sign on board with word and action towards that? Do we use our emotional intelligence to move people to action? This reminds me of an incredible friend I have. This friend is someone who has emotional intelligence to like the 1000th degree, however, whatever the highest is, that's where they are. And here's why. It's not just that whenever I come with my emotions, and they'll sometimes be all whacked out of like frustrated or something, they don't come to me with like cliches saying, well, this is how you should be responding, this is how you should feel. They actually usually will validate how I'm feeling in that moment, and they validate it in a way that, again, doesn't say it's right, but they validate the emotions that I'm feeling. Then they move me to an action step. This is emotional intelligence, not just saying calm down. That's not an emotional intelligent person. Someone tells me to calm down when I'm like on a frustrating high, it usually doesn't go over well. Neither does cliches that just feed into my frustrations, but rather validating where I am currently and then moving me to where I should be, and just saying the right things to adjust my frustration to an action step, and an action step in the right direction. That's the kind of emotional intelligence we need to have with our teams. Do we validate where they are? Do we emotionally come on board and then move them to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, these positive steps forward? It's awesome when we can be like that. So let's go back to the very beginning. What were those 6 things that we talked about for an emotional intelligent person? And now you need to say, do I have these? Am I this type of leader? Number 1, do you recognize your own emotions? Can you recognize when you are experiencing an emotion? First, you have to know where you are up and down, going crazy, whatever it is. Can you recognize your own emotions? Number 2, how do you respond when you're frustrated? Because it's different than our normal resting place. Number 3, do you have active listening skills? Number 4, how do you respond when you're anxious? Number 5, are you patient to get to the right conclusion? And number 6, are you able to read other emotions, acknowledge them, and ignite them into the right direction? That is an incredible person. That's an incredible leader. And I hope we take Nehemiah 5 as it really guides us through this question of emotional intelligence and use it in our own lives as well. It will make us all better leaders. Now, if you'd like more information, go to teamperformancecoaching.info or email me at teamperformancecoaching@gmail.com. I will send you a book if you email me that moves people from point A to point B, called Growing Grass on Rocks. So we'll see you next time as we explore next Nehemiah 6.